So then, just a few months later now, in 1909, the two have been independently invited to come to Clark University in America to receive honorary doctorates. They're beginning to get recognition. The movement is proceeding just fine, and Freud really has been advertising Jung as second in command, and he will take over when I am done. And not too many, as you can imagine, of the other psychoanalysts thought too well of this. So you can imagine all the political intrigues and jealousies that are going on. But the two get invited to go to Clark. And right in 1909, Jung is beginning to get clients of his own, and so he's decided to retire from the Bogotsi. And the day before they leave for their trip, they are having lunch, and Freud is there, and a friend, one of the other psychoanalysts, Shandor Ferenczi, is there. And Bleuler has made everyone on staff take a vow of abstinence from alcohol. So Jung has not had a drop in 9 years, and Freud convinces him to break the vow and drink a glass of wine. And so Jung decides to drink the wine, and Freud's feeling very great about this victory over his up-and-coming young son here. And then Jung begins to start talking about these interesting peat bog corpses that have been found up in Denmark, dating back to the Iron Age, and how interesting they are. And suddenly Freud goes, "What are you dwelling on this for?" And Jung says, "Well, it's just I'm interested in culture, and I'm very much interested in these corpses." And then Freud faints. And then it was later found out that Freud interpreted it as Jung having a death wish against him, dwelling on corpses in his presence. So this was his psychoanalysis of Jung. And so the next day they leave for Clark University, and they spend the whole time on board the ship psychoanalyzing each other's dreams. And this is the only time they indulged in this. Jung later made the joke, he said, "You know, it never occurred to me that the only time Freud received an analysis was a Jungian analysis." And Freud would never let anybody psychoanalyze him, but this was the only occasion that it took place. And he said, well, Freud had this dream about the love triangle with his wife and the sister, and he didn't know I knew anything about it. And I said, "Doctor, if you would just give me more information, you know, on your relationship to these two, maybe we can make heads or tails of this." Then Freud says, "I can't risk my authority on that." And Jung said, "That sentence burned itself into my memory, and I never forgot it. From then on, I knew that I could not trust him, because he would never give in to learning more about himself or psychoanalyzing himself, but he was very quick to psychoanalyze everyone else around him." And he said he was willing to put his own personal complexes ahead of scientific truth, and that was the beginning of the end for me. But then Jung has...
Could you go back to that
Sure.
statement? And he said, I would not risk my authority. Is that what he said?
That's exactly what he says.
And
I cannot risk my authority.
Cannot risk my authority. So what authority was he referring to? Was he...
His reputation, yeah.
So, in other words, he was not going to go into it because he wasn't going to admit anything, but was this admitting it outwardly or inwardly or both?
I think he was just afraid about anyone finding out that he was sleeping with his wife's sister. I mean, if he said a single word further, he's already told him some dream that nobody knows what the dream was,
Right.
except that it was concerning that. So he was probably
that
terrified.
sounds reasonable to me. Why would Jung not trust him? Because
as far as he was concerned, their relationship should be getting more and more intimate and personal. And if he is going to be indeed the next...
You can't read mine.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So he's keeping himself on this throne, you know.
So we're talking
Jung
about
down
personal
here.
trust, not a professional, academic
I think
trust.
both.
Oh,
I
let's
think
jump
both.
into it. Isn't Freud the one that has Sun Uranus conjunct?
Yes.
All right, so here we've got it. He does not want his balls cut off. Excuse me, but it's the Uranosness to the max.
Right.
He's holding on to his creation literally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now I'd like to see where his Jupiter is to this thing, because now we're getting into the waters of this.
Okay, got it.
He does not want to become the old king. He wants to be the only king.
His Jupiter is, I believe, trine or square Neptune with Saturn trining or squaring. No, Jupiter is conjunct Neptune and Saturn is squaring that. So the expansion of the religious interest is checked by the Saturn skepticism.
This
So he
is
won't let
another,
himself.
yeah, you know.
He just won't let it
Fear,
let it
fear,
happen.
fear. Saturn and Neptune will both head you right to it. Anyway.
So then Jung has a very important dream on board this ship, which all of his subsequent work comes out of this dream. And he said, I had this dream that Freud could not make heads or tails of. And what it was that I was in this house, and I had the feeling that it was my house, but it had other floors to it. And he said the floor that I was on was decorated with 18th century Rococo furnishing. It was very beautiful. And I decided I wanted to know what was on the ground floor. So I went down the stairs, and when I got down there, all the furnishings were in a very medieval style. And then he said, as I was digging around down there, I found a kind of closet that led to another stairway that in turn led down, and he came to this very Roman style, like the ancient Roman architecture. Everything was done in this very cavernous style, and he had the feeling of going backwards in time as he went down to these different levels of the house. And he said on the floor were all these stones, and on one of the stones was a gold ring. And he said he pulled the ring and opened the stone, and that in turn led to another passage that he followed down, and it led into this huge cave, and on the floor of the cave were all these pottery shards and human bones and 2 skulls. Freud thought that the 2 skulls referred to him and someone else. So he says, as Jung describes it, he said, he held his hand out like he was holding a skull, and he said, what does that make you think of? And he was trying to get him to confess that he had a death wish towards him and someone else. So Jung says, well, I had a suspicion of what the dream was beginning to refer to, but I knew that if I told him, he wouldn't take me seriously. So what I said was, the 2 skulls represent my wife and her sister, being very political, and but apparently it didn't work, and they didn't get any further with each other's dreams. But
No, it did work. That's his problem.
The dream sounds very Christian. You know, going back for the Christian.
right. Yes, and that's one thing that keeps turning up in their correspondence again is the Christian versus the Jew projection, and Freud always thinking, well, he's thinking of me as a Jew, and but he's always, Freud in turn is always trying to dismiss Jung as a Christian. Your theological vocabulary is beginning to bother me. He keeps dropping these comments about Jung being a Christian.
But and Freud was trying to use Jung as a Christian politically.
Yes, possibly. Yes, because of the not wanting to be seeing the psychoanalytic movement as a Jewish movement. If he could have Christians/Aryans on his side, then it would be taken more seriously as a cultural phenomenon and not just some Jewish. Hey, get a drink of water, or maybe we should break for 5 minutes.
Yeah, we should probably break.
Okay, but couldn't the dream, I mean, the dream could, I mean, it was obvious.
I'm sorry?
Was other,
Very on the 2 skull.
Which is a chunk from
It's 2 chapters.
Psychological Types. General description of the types. And I have page 178 to page 300. I don't know if you have the same page numbers. I have a different edition.
That's 8 to 10. So it's chapter
general
8 to chapter
description of the
9.
type?
Yeah, just chapter 8 itself. Just chapter 8. Yeah, general description of the type. Look at the type theory.